Let's start with you, Patrick, and the response by Mexico's president, very specifically to the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. That is very specifically what Donald Trump said he would do.
Yes, and of course, the legality of that, the American president just can't rewrite names on maps necessarily. But Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum was asked about it in her daily briefing today, and while it is certainly insulting to many Mexicans that this body of water that their entire lives, throughout modern history has been called the Gulf of Mexico, would somehow be magically renamed the Gulf of America. She had some fun with it at the press conference and actually sort of poked fun at Donald Trump and actually came back with her own suggestion for what this body of water could be renamed as.
Obviously, the name Gulf of Mexico is recognized by the United Nations, by a United Nations agency. Why don't we call it Mexican America? It sounds nice, right? Since 1607, the Constitution of Apatzingán referred to it as Mexican America. We're going to call it Mexican America. It sounds beautiful, right? And the Gulf of Mexico has been recognized internationally since 1607 as well. Yesterday, President Trump was misinformed. He was told that Felipe Calderón and García Luna still govern in Mexico. But no, in Mexico, the people govern.
So I think this is some of the frustration you're hearing about the region that President Trump, as he did during his first term, or soon-to-be President Trump, as he did during his first term, kind of brings his own facts into the equation. And certainly that has been the frustration in Panama, where, of course, the canal now for 25 years, nearly 25 years, has been in Panamanian hands. It is being run by Panama, despite what President Trump says, that somehow China calls the shots on Panama. U.S. officials over the years have said that while they are concerned by China's rising influence in Panama and the region, certainly there's no hard proof that China runs the Panama Canal. It is Panama's canal to run, and has actually been expanded more than double the number of ships now goes through the expanded post-Panamax canal. So it is very clearly Panama's to run, even if Donald Trump feels that, however, by force or by economic coercion, he could somehow take it back, the so-called bad deal of Jimmy Carter's. But this is an issue that unites all Panamanians and certainly many people in the region that remember the years of gunboat diplomacy where the U.S. sort of took over states that it disagreed with or where it saw economic importance. So, whether it's Greenland or Mexico or Panama, a lot of pushback today from these comments by President-elect Donald Trump.
President-elect Donald Trump is insisting that the United States should expand its territory, calling for Canada to become the 51st state, threatening to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and world leaders are standing up to Trump's suggestions that he might even use military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal. Listen.
Just as a matter of principle, for us it is clear the sovereignty of states has to be respected.
You are asking me if I think the United States will invade Greenland? The answer is no. Have we entered an era that sees the return of the survival of the fittest? The answer is yes. And so, should we let ourselves be intimidated? Should we let worry take over? Of course not.
Greenland is not mega. Greenland is not going to be mega.
La soberanía de nuestro canal no es negociable. Las únicas manos que controlan el canal son panameñas y así seguirá siendo.
Obviously, the name Gulf of Mexico is recognized by the United Nations, by a United Nations agency. Why don't we call it Mexican America? It sounds nice, right?
Let's discuss with Republican Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Would you be comfortable with sending U.S. troops, as President Trump suggested yesterday he is considering, to take over what is effectively sovereign land?
Well, I think you all are missing the bigger picture here of what President Trump is trying to do. He's thinking about the long-term security of the Western Hemisphere. We know, for example, the Russian and now Chinese are looking at the Arctic and how they can exploit that. That obviously concerns not only us, but everybody in the Western Hemisphere. And he's thinking about our long-term protection. Same thing with regard to Panama. We know that the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China owns ports on both sides of that canal, and that puts us at risk in a potential conflict. So he's thinking about the long-term security, and he's starting a negotiation. And that's what this is about. And I guarantee you there's a lot more people today thinking about the risks that the Russians posed to us through that Northwest Passage than were just a couple of days ago.
So I do want to ask you about what you mentioned, that Hong Kong-based company that owns seaports on both sides of the Panama Canal. But I do want to go back to the question, because Trump is putting out there the idea that the U.S. military might be involved in some kind of foreign entanglement over sovereign territory. How do you square that with his campaign promises about keeping the U.S. out of needless wars?
Well, I think what's actually happening is the press asked him if there was anything he was going to take off the table. And as a negotiator, he said, no, nothing is going to be taken off the table, because that's the way Trump negotiates. And by the way, I might point out that when he was president before, he did an outstanding job of negotiating different trade agreements, buying more of our agricultural products because of his trade negotiating style. So it really gets back to President Trump is beginning a negotiation. He's also trying to think long-term about the threats to this country and keep us safe. And that is what he's talking about when he's talking about Greenland or the Panama Canal. How do we keep this country safe long-term from some of the threats we see from countries like Russia and the People's Republic of China?
Sure. I do wonder about the approach, though, Senator, because there is the risk of alienating allies. And to your point about Chinese influence over shipping and port operations around the world, it is a risk, especially if they weaponize supply chains, which they have shown a willingness to do. That Hong Kong-based company that owns those seaports at both ends of the canal, those are private infrastructure investments, and Chinese firms have done this all over Latin America, all over Africa as well. I'm sure this isn't news to you. I wonder if you think the U.S. would gain more in competing with Beijing by expanding those same kind of investments, making more partners, rather than bullying, hinting that we'll use force if we don't get what we want.
It is a mistake to believe that any sort of private company in China is actually private the way we think of it here in the United States. It's simply not true. Under Chinese law, every Chinese company has to do whatever the central government wants it to do. It's called communism. It's something China has been governed under for decades. And just because they've changed some of the ways they've done things doesn't mean that every Chinese company doesn't have to do what the central government does. So the fact that these are under Hong Kong companies doesn't mean anything. They would have to do exactly what the Chinese government would tell them to do.
On the question of the approach to these foreign countries, is it better to suggest that you might send your military to Panama, or potentially suggest that there might be a way that we could work together on infrastructure projects to maintain U.S. influence in this hemisphere?
I think that, first of all, again, people are missing the bigger picture. President Trump was asked if anything was on the table, and he said everything's on the table. That is where a lot of this is coming from. And yes, absolutely, we have to do a better job of getting out there and telling our story, of making our investments, making sure that we're targeting our investments and our aid to countries that are helping us out, and doing more, for example, in Africa to be able to combat what China is doing there. Panama Canal is another example. Yes, we have to do a better job. This Biden-Harris administration has utterly failed us on foreign policy. Their appeasement-first approach has left us less safe. We have to do a better job in this next administration.
Senator, I do want to get to quickly the fact that Trump is set to meet with Senate Republican leaders later today. I imagine he's going to try to persuade some folks on his cabinet picks. I know you met with Pete Hegseth last month. Are you prepared to vote to confirm him for defense secretary?
Every one of the cabinet secretaries has a process that they're going to go through and follow. One step is meeting with the senators, such as Pete meeting with me. And then, well, they'll go through a public hearing process, and then we'll have the vote. So we need to let the entire process play out. But I got to tell you, I had a very good conversation with Pete Hegseth, and I look forward to hearing what his public hearing is going to be like. And that's what will be true for all the cabinet nominees.
So you are reserving, awaiting that confirmation process to decide whether you will vote or not for Hegseth?
We have a process that every one of the candidates will go through, every one of the cabinet nominees will go through. We need to allow that process to play out. It includes meetings such as senators with me, but also the public hearing as well. And that's going to be important for all the cabinet nominees.
Senator Pete Ricketts, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we have to leave the conversation there. We appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective.
Great. Thanks, Boris.